Welcome to Weekly Talkback. This is the show where we get to talk to Pastor Dave about his message on Sunday morning. I'm Kevin Beers.
I'm David Witten.
And the message this week, it was July 16th, 2023. The message was entitled, Welcome a Stranger, Welcome Christ. This is a second in a series of messages on hospitality, or the sacred art of hospitality.
Correct.
So, during your message, you said,
church hospitality doesn't depend on well-chosen words or gestures. It doesn't depend on selecting the right people for a welcoming committee. Visitors don't come back to churches because of what we said or because of what we did, but because of how we made them feel. Church hospitality depends solely on the integrity, the sincerity, and the authenticity of the community of faith. In other words, we are to be real folk. You know what I mean? We don't have to put on airs. We are real people here worshiping the Lord our Savior. Anyone can see through superficial hospitality.
so based on all that,
Okay.
I got a few questions on this one.
Okay.
Okay. What's your perspective on implementing a welcoming committee? Is there a good way to make such a committee effective?
Well, I suppose there is, but I think, I think what I was intending to stress was that the welcoming committee should be everyone in the church.
Okay.
I mean, everyone should make it a point. Even the most introverted of the bunch should make it a point to try to at least say hi to a first-time visitor. I do see merit in a welcoming committee. I would think it would have to be composed of people that find themselves comfortable in that kind of setting, not minding coming up to a first-time visitor and welcoming them. I was telling someone yesterday that I served in a church where a gentleman took it upon himself to be kind of like the welcoming committee. He wasn't selected by the church. It was just his nature. He would stand out by the door with a bulletin or two, and he would just wait to see if anyone new came. If someone new came, he would, take them by the hand, shake, lead them in, introduce them to people as he came in. He would find a seat for them, and he would sit down with them. And then during joys and concerns, he would stand up and just welcome, so that the person himself or herself wouldn't have to stand up and introduce himself.
Okay.
And so in that sense, I mean, he would have been a perfect chair for a welcoming committee, but in fact, he was this church's welcoming committee.
Okay. The danger I see in a welcoming committee, while I think it's a really good thing to have and make it up of people who are just naturally welcoming, the danger in that is it's kind of like when it comes to shepherding, everybody says, well, the pastor will do that. I don't have to do it myself, because if we have a welcoming committee, I don't have to do that because we appointed somebody to do that for us.
Right.
And I think that's where the danger lies.
Definitely.
Where it should be, like you said, everybody. And speaking as an extreme introvert myself, I had to get outside my box to learn how to speak to people. Now, I realize I've met plenty of extreme introverts who are very awkward when it comes to social settings. And it's going to be hard for them. I was able to be one that was not, I guess it's outside my box, or it's outside my comfort zone, but it's not outside my box.
Gotcha. You've gotten to the point where you can do it. It may be a bit of a challenge, but you've included that now as part of your box.
Yes,
Yeah.
and with lots of practice, I got better at it. I don't believe I'm the absolute best person, but I have come a really long way from speaking to no one ever to welcome. I do try to welcome everyone who's new.
Yeah.
But I don't take a lot of time because I feel just very awkward as the conversation starts unless I hit a chord that I can really relate to, and we have
Absolutely.
a real conversation.
Well, and there is a negative side to that. I can't remember, I'm at that age now. I can't remember where it was someone telling me the story or whether it was a part of my own story. But the story goes that it was a small country church, and they hadn't seen a visitor in that place for years. And a visitor came in, and they just kind of overwhelmed this person, almost desperate, like, oh my gosh, did you move into the area? Are you going to come to this church again? Do you have family? Just on and on and on. I mean, there is a limit to welcoming someone.
Sure. and yeah, because I have visited churches where no one speaks to me at all. I've had the experience of being overwhelmed with people. Mm-hmm. And then I've had the just right, I guess you might call it,
right,
where a few people come up and greet me and mm-hmm. Find out how we're doing, where we're from, things like that.
Yeah.
And I don't know that there's a really good mix. It actually leads me to the next question.
Okay.
Because I've seen this in our own congregation too.
Okay.
What about people who, because you talk about being authentic, mm-hmm. This is where this is coming from. Mm-hmm. What about people who tend to be very negative? Can they hurt an environment of hospitality, even though negativity is their authentic self?
Well, if it's their authentic self, they should change it. As I've always said, no, Christianity and pessimism doesn't mix. I mean, we're perpetual optimists, I would hope to think. But having said that, yeah, I mean, I think, a person with not a lot of negativity or, really self-centered that, gets you in the corner and starts talking about stuff, that can be a turn off.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because one of the things I've noticed, we've had people in this church where we have a stranger come in, and the person who goes to greet them, it's like, oh, do not talk to that person. like I'm just thinking that in my mind, but I'm not in the conversation, so I don't know what's going on, and that's probably just me being judgmental. But overall, that person does tend to be very negative, and I don't want that negativity to be a reflection of the congregation. So that's where my concern is, but that might be my controlling nature, which is my authentic self.
Yeah. Well, the other aspect to that is that in a greeting, I think if you're welcoming a visitor, and this may be one of your questions, but if you're welcoming a visitor, first of all, don't dominate the conversation. Mm-hmm. What you're doing is welcoming that person, asking a few basic, kind of initial questions about that person. But don't get them in a corner for 10 or 15 minutes and talk about your own experiences and so on and so forth. I think that's a little bit too much. Mm-hmm. For that initial visit, I think, hey, how you doing? It's nice to see you. What brings you here? How did you find out about us? Blah, blah, blah kind of thing. And then let it go. Don't dominate the conversation. Let other people come in as well and greet the person.
I'm part of an organization, and one of the things that we do is called FORM, where you talk about family, occupation, recreation, and the M is more what's your motive or what motivates you to come to this organization.
Okay.
And basically, I don't talk to you about your family and your occupation and your recreation. I talk to you about family, perhaps. Mm-hmm. Then I will pass you on to someone else, and I will introduce you, saying, "Oh, and about your family." Mm-hmm. Well, they know I've talked about family now, so now they're going to talk about your occupation. Yeah, and we're gonna move it along so that you're not overwhelmed, but at the same time, you're getting a chance to talk about yourself. Yeah. So and we were trained to do that, which leads to the next question: how do you feel about training people in welcoming or in hospitality?
Well, I think that would be a great step. I'm not sure if it actually is going to be, how do I say, implemented. People are people, and you can sit down and tell them this is the right way to, and they'll go and do whatever they decide to do. But I think there is merit. Just like I said, don't dominate the conversation. But we've had conversations in my sermons before about how to converse with people and be more of a listener than you are, and that sort of thing. But yeah, I think I see merit in that.
Okay. Yeah, because well, like I said, I was trained on using form, and it makes a lot of sense because we've had, we talk about form in general, and then we have people who will like, oh, your family. You tell me about, you say, well, I got a wife and 2 kids. Oh, what do you do for a living? Like they move down the line.
Yeah.
Whereas it's like, oh, you have a wife and 2 kids. How old are your kids? What sex are they? What?
Yeah.
Really dig in and the other thing that we try to train on is don't just ask questions for the sake of asking questions. Really take an interest in that person.
Right. Exactly.
I mean, how do you? And that you can't. That's something you can't really train, but as a reminder, if it's in your mind, like I really got to get to know this person.
Well, and follow the person's lead. I mean, if you've got a set of questions, but this person goes in a different direction, be willing to go in that direction with him, and maybe ask him to flesh it out a little bit more, or explain what he or she means.
Yeah, for myself, I have a real interest in learning people's stories. So it makes, like I said, I'm not always. Sometimes I tend to be awkward in social situations, but I have a genuine interest in people, so that's why it makes it easier for me to get outside my comfort zone.
Right.
Because I really do want to find out.
You really do want to know a person.
Yeah.
Learn to
And
know.
another thing that we found is if you find someone of a particular occupation and there's someone else who has that same occupation, they're going to
connect them.
They're going to connect very easily.
Yeah.
For instance, I'm a software engineer, and we have someone who has come to the church who's also a software engineer. We have the greatest conversations, and no one around us understands what we're talking about.
Speaking a third language there.
Right, but that's a connection that, if anybody comes into the church doing any kind of occupation, it's like, oh, you should meet so-and-so, and it helps create comfort in the connection.
Sure.
That sort of thing. Now I'm starting to preach. Okay, so let's move on.
Okay.
You said
our society hungers for a sense of belonging.
Okay, that's all we're going with right there. Now, I'm going to disagree with what you said just on the technicality.
Okay.
Because I think human nature requires community.
Okay.
But I do agree that society in general needs community, otherwise the society itself falls apart.
Yeah, it breaks down.
So do you have any other thoughts? Where were you going when you said our society needs community?
Well, I mean, from a Christian perspective and from a church perspective, community is such a vital part of who we are. And then ideally, we feel like we belong. We're part of a community of faith. We participate. We are an encourager. We're an advocate and supporter, and so on to one another. I don't see that outside of church as much. Now there are some other, secular groups and clubs that people belong to, but I don't see it to the intensity and to the extent that I see it in church community. And so a part of our life as followers of Jesus and being Christian is participating in community. And I see that part is a part that we can say to the world, we have this to offer, and you're not finding it out there. Come be a part of this. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Now, do you think that might be, when you look back in the 50s, 60s, that era, community was centered around the church?
Oh, yeah.
And then when people fell away from the church, that sense of community went with it.
I think that's a contributing factor for sure. I think there's other factors along the way. Just the way that the family has kind of changed, transformed, so that both parents are now working, and their little communities may be, workplace over here and a workplace over here. But certainly less involvement in church over the years has, it's broken down where the church is not. In fact, Sunday morning is just a small part of a very busy schedule for most people.
Right.
And, those, I commend those who take that extra hour and commit themselves to it. But it can be so much more. And I guess that's the point.
And I also think some of the loss of community affects people who come to church so that because we're so transient too as a population, it's hard to, because I know of kids who have moved from school to school to school, and they've learned don't make friends, because if I make friends, I'm just going to have to leave them.
It's
after
tough.
a short time.
Yeah.
And that, being part of a transient society contributes to that, because of that vulnerability that's required, and leads right into the next question again. Okay, so in your message you said,
in a rented upper room, Jesus expressed hospitality when he fed his disciples bread and wine, symbolizing his forthcoming sacrificial love.
I thought this was a really good illustration of welcoming others, because they rented that room, so he can't welcome them to his home, but he is welcoming them to who he is. So it's not, you're not offering hospitality because of the home. You're welcoming people into your world, and to me that means you have to become vulnerable.
Definitely.
For instance, if you invite a stranger into your home, because Jesus talks about that, actually the entire Bible talks about that a lot, you're taking a risk. Definitely. That the people you're inviting in, or the person you're inviting in, is not going to harm you or your family. So basically, you're making you and your family vulnerable to this whole process. So, and you talked about it's hospitality of the heart. Right. So the only way that can even happen is if you completely open yourself up, which means making yourself vulnerable. Absolutely. And I think that's what, so this idea of, well, I don't want to get attached to people because I know I'm moving on. That is harming our ability to become vulnerable, because you'll never form the relationship. No relationship can happen without the vulnerability. Right, exactly. So there's this two ideas being opposing each other, where I got to keep myself safe because it's going to hurt when I have to leave, but you never form the connection that would fulfill you while you're there. But when you leave a relationship, you have to mourn over it, you grieve over it. Right. Life is just hard.
But your comment, about Jesus not having a home and opening his heart was his way of expressing hospitality. It goes back to the very beginning when I talked about you have to be real. Everyone can see superficial hospitality. To be real means to basically open up your heart. And quite often churches, when people come to churches for the first time, what they see is spick and span. Right. They see people trying to be something that they're not, and that is, saintly rather than just plain sinners like the rest of us. And so I guess what I was trying to encourage us to think about is being real means just being who you are. That means that, you haven't got it all together. That means I've been saved by grace alone, but I continue to struggle. I have my weaknesses, so welcome to the crowd, kind of thing. And so it kind of booked in by the idea that be real, and then hospitality truly is from the heart, not from the home.
Okay. All right, we're going to wrap it up there. The link to the message will be down in the description. So take a look at that. If you haven't heard it, come back to this video and hear what we talk about, because we're actually just fleshing out some of the points in there, and let us know what you think. And that wraps it up for me. So we'll see you next week.
Okay, take care.